All right, I'd like to go ahead and call the Monona Grove School District Board of Education Special School Board meeting to order. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes, there has.
Thank you. Possible action item is updated 2020-2021 school reopening plan. Dan?
Okay, thank you. All right, so as you stated, the topic tonight is to look at the next phase of reopening. So what we have is a short presentation. You board members received a memo in advance with the background information along with a recommendation. And then we have some slides that we'll like to share that mirror the information that was in the written memo. So if it's okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen and we will. Okay. All right, so 5 key points tonight's presentation. Just we'll get background and timeline. Just a quick review of where we're at currently with our instructional models at the elementary and secondary. Updates with safety and risk mitigation protocols. And then the next phase of reopening and what the next steps would be following any potential board action. Okay, so these are the same bullet points you've seen many times over and over again. A reminder, we started this process back in July with initial discussion and decisions about reopening for the school year. So we'll go through these pretty quickly. And then the last time that there was something for consideration of the board was the latest order from Public Health Madison-Dane County, which came out on March 2nd. And so as we prepared for tonight's meeting and a possible next phase, since the last time we met, in fact, there was something significant that happened, and that is that the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, came out with their revised guidelines just last week on March 19th. And we expected or expect Public Health Madison-Dane County to also update their order to coincide with the updated CDC guidance. That hasn't happened yet. But nonetheless, as we've been, looking at information to make our decisions throughout the year, of course, we've relied very heavily on our local health department, but as well as the federal level CDC. All right, so a quick review of what's happening at the elementary. They've are into their third phase of reopening. We began at the end of January with our 4K2 students in a 2-day-a-week hybrid, added our grade 3 through 5 2 weeks later, and now they are scheduled for April 5th to move on to their 4-day-a-week in-person model. And just a reminder of how our enrollment has fluctuated at the elementary. When we were in the 2-day, or while we are currently in the 2-day hybrid model, we have about 42% of our students attending school 2 days a week, about 58% still 100% virtual. When we move to the 4-day model, the numbers have increased pretty significantly. Up to 74% of our students will be attending in person, and 26% will remain virtual. And I think that's significant as we try to project what might happen with secondary as well. So as a reminder, we just last week began our first phase of students returning to school in our 2-day hybrid model last Monday on March 15th. And currently we have about 55% of our students participating in hybrid and about 45% remaining virtual. Okay, so this slide again is the emergency order number 14 that's still under effect with Public Health Madison-Dane County that we've been following up to this point. If you recall, they gave some additional flexibility and basically removed the requirement and made it more to a recommendation with regard to physical distancing and some of the other requirements. And so at this point, that is still in place. The recommendation of 6 feet distancing with their order. As I mentioned, we expect that to change shortly. And then the recommendations are still in place as far as safe school reopening, the different approaches. Okay, so let's get to the real update, and that is the change in CDC guidance. And there are really 5 key updates that were part of this update that came out last week. First of all, revised physical distancing recommendations to reflect at least 3 feet between students and classrooms and provide clearer guidance when a greater distance, such as 6 feet, is recommended. Clarified information and recommendations regarding ventilation in schools. Remove their recommendation for physical barriers, clarified the role of community transmission in the levels of decision making, and then lastly, some additional guidance on intervention with clusters. So let's talk about those key changes, physical distancing. So to summarize what is currently in place with CDC in their revised guidance, they now state that 3 feet of physical distance that refers to the distance between students. Teachers and staff still need to maintain 6 feet from students and each other. In the second bullet point, that 3 feet of physical distance is appropriate when students are masked. And when masks are off, such as lunch or recess, 6 feet should still be maintained as much as possible. Third bullet point, when cohorting in static groups are not possible and when community transmission is high, then we still should be utilizing 6 feet of distancing for grades 6-12. And then lastly, 6 feet still should be in place in lobbies, auditoriums, and during sports practices. So we'll get into those in a little bit more detail on what that might mean for our schools. The guidance with regard to the importance of air ventilation. And so currently in all of our buildings, our outside airflow is set to between 40 and 50% compared to where we typically be at about 15 to 20. So we easily meet the guidance set by CDC for our air exchanges, which we know is really important as a mitigation factor. And the system is running from 6 a.m. until 8 p.m. in all of our buildings, unless there happens to be an event beyond 8 p.m. and that would be adapted. Air filters are another key piece of the ventilation system. They are monitored and changed monthly as opposed to quarterly in a normal situation. And our current filters in place are rated, the rating is called a MERV rating. We currently are using a MERV rating of 8 to 14 district-wide, and then as our capacity increases, we'll move that up to a rating of 10 to 14. Now, Jared can speak to that a little bit more detail if you have questions about what do those ratings mean and why do we have those variances in place. But again, we are meeting the recommendations with regard to our school ventilation. All right, and then some other key elements that are in the overall guidance. Again, remembering that the layered protection is extremely important, that all the different mitigation factors together are what are really key. And then the community transmission and looking at community risk, it's still a factor that needs to be considered. And then we take the phased approach based upon that community transmission. All right, so the guidance with regard to what data is important to track with regard to community transmission. This was updated about a month ago from CDC, again, as we learn more about the virus and how it is impacted in schools. And so they're really looking at 2 key indicators: number of cases in our community per 100,000 and the positivity rates. Again, both of these are daily averages over the past 7 days. And it wasn't too long ago that we were in high transmission in both of these areas. And we'll give you the updated data to show where we're at right now. And so really that we have 4 categories that all have different impacts with regard to the recommendations from CDC. All right, so here's a graph that shows our number of positive cases over time in Dane County. And this tracks all the way back to last March. And of course, you've seen this many times before. We know we had our peak in November, December in Dane County, and then we've been trending downward. The red line shows the threshold for the high transmission at 100 cases per 100,000. The yellow line is substantial transmission. And just this past week now, we've actually dipped below the substantial transmission into the moderate. And so here's our most up-to-date data with regard to transmission rates. So as of yesterday's data, Our new 7-case average in Dane County is 40.1. So that puts us into the moderate range, which is 10 to 49. And then the 7-day average for positivity rate is at a 0.6%. We're in the low rate for positivity. So that's our current data. So then what does that mean with regard to our chart? So again, the high transmission, greater than 100, we're currently in the yellow, the moderate, with regard to the cases, and we're in the low transmission with regard to the positivity rate. Okay, so here's the updated guidance from CDC when we're in these different thresholds with regard to transmission. So again, we know that the elementary schools, there's been evidence now throughout this year that there is less transmission with our younger students. And so the recommendation of the 3 feet distancing in classrooms is all the way across all the different transmission rates. When we're at substantial or high, they also, it's important to look at having cohorting, which we do have in place at the elementaries. More importantly, we're here tonight to talk about middle and high school. So at the middle and high school, depending on where we're at, there's really 3 different recommendations. On the high transmission, is essential, or is it recommended that you have 3 foot distancing when you are able to cohort. If you're not able to cohort, then 6 feet is still recommended. And that is the case again with our middle and high school. We're not able to cohort, but again, we're not currently at that high transmission rate. Under substantial transmission, and the rate we were at just until this past week, then the recommendation is 3 foot distancing and still recommended cohorting if possible. And now as we move into the moderate and the low transmission, now the recommendation is the physical distancing of at least 3 feet, but the cohorting is no longer part of the recommendation when we're at those low transmission rates. All right, so taking that background information to context as to our decision making about whether to move on to a next phase. Again, this is a slide you've seen many times throughout the year about our phased approach, which is still very much supported by both CDC and public health. All right, so the next phase potentially to move into would be a 4-day-a-week option for grades 6 through 12. And I noted in this bullet point cohorts A and B, actually the middle school and high school are using color codes for their different cohorts. But the bottom line is every class is divided into 2 groups, okay, that each attend 2 days a week. And so if we move to the 4 days, it would not be, it would be essentially taking those students and just combining together into the same classroom that they're currently assigned to. Now, if possible, there perhaps could be some slight schedule adjustments to try to adjust class sizes, but that's not, a major factor that can be counted on to make major adjustments. And again, our principal can speak to that a little bit later if there's questions. And then the recommendation would still be to stick with our current plan that we have in place, the 4-day-a-week, where Wednesdays are co-planning days for our teachers. All right, schedules. Again, this is very tentative, but this is based upon our transportation challenges that we would have, assuming that we'd have many more students that would need to be transported. We still want to minimize the number of students on our buses and try to minimize distancing as much as possible. And therefore, in order to have enough buses and drivers to transport all the students, we would be looking at the need to have double routes. So no longer would we be able to support a midday route as we currently have in the high school. We do not have enough drivers and buses available in midday. And so we know that the current schedule that we have in place at the elementaries is 8:30 to 2:30. That would stay in place. Glacial Drumlin, we believe we could support on a similar schedule where we would be able to share transportation with our Cottage Grove schools. But the high school would need to run on a different schedule so that we could utilize, again, those double routes. And so the recommendation would be to start at a 9:45, which would allow us to run the early routes with the elementary and middle, and then use those same buses for the high school routes to start at 9:45. Likewise, with the end time, we'd need to finish up the afternoon routes with the elementary, then utilize those buses to pick up high school students for a 3:15 release time. The other rationale for the later versus early with the high school, of course, that also would help support students that might have after school activities as well. So again, this is tentative based upon busing. Certainly not necessarily the most ideal instructionally, but that would be general parameters what we'd be looking at on those daily schedules. All right, timeline for recommendation. If we move to a 4-day model, again, what that means is a need to survey parents. It needs to make adjustments in busing. Every route has to be rescheduled again for busing when you have more students that are added to the transportation. So the time needs to be dealt with there, as well as we have state mandated testing coming up beginning in April. Our forward exams at the middle school, as well as our Aspire at the high school, and those have been scheduled. And so that's taken into consideration as well with the timeline. And so the recommendation would be that we would move to that next phase for grades 6 through 8, beginning on April 19th, and then a week later for the grades 9 through 12 on April 26th. The tentative timelines that would support those start dates. Again, if the board were to approve this next phase this evening, we would survey parents tomorrow. So this week we would collect the survey results to determine who would like to, which students would like to participate in the in-person. And then we have spring break coming up. And then we would have essentially that next week and a half to finalize student schedule changes and create bus routes, notify the parents of the bus routes, and then we could start on the 19th, again with the middle school. And then a very similar schedule for the high school, except one additional week in doing the bus routes. The second set of routes for the high school would come after the middle school. And again, there's some other issues with regard to the schedule that we can talk about, for the rationale for those timelines. Okay, and then again, if the board were to approve, next steps would be, again, communication with families and a survey, moving ahead for grade 6, 12 in accordance with that timeline. All right, so that was really quick, a real broad overview of the process and recommendation. We do have our 2 principals with us this evening, Mitch McGrath from the high school and Chris Langer from the middle school, as well as some of our other team members. And so what I would like to do before we take questions from the board is give our principals an opportunity to add a little bit more detail and context to the overview that I just gave. And then we'll open it up to questions on any of the specifics of all these areas. So Mr. McGrath, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off and just anything you'd like to share with the board.
Before you start that, I just want to check because the PowerPoint summary was great, and I don't mean to interrupt. I really apologize for that. But could you post that PowerPoint on Board Docs? It's a great summary document, and I didn't see it, and I checked just before I came in.
It's there, Susan.
It is up now?
It is, yep. So maybe try refreshing.
Yeah.
It's in the public content now. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, it is in the public content, but if there's any slides that you'd like to focus on, I can bring them back on the screen later as well.
Oh, that's fine. Is it in the board content though?
It's under the public content. It is titled Board BOE Presentation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, Mr. McGrath.
Sure, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Thanks to the board members who were able to come out last week to the high school as well. It was nice to see you here and have that visit. And I'm sure it was informative to walk around and see our first day or second day in that hybrid model. Just a little more context around the schedule. That's always a piece that we have questions on. So might as well share some of that information on the front end. You saw it went from 9:45 to 3:15. So that includes then 70-minute instructional blocks. It includes 2 30-minute lunches. It includes a period from 9 to 9:40 in the morning that we would be focusing on our green cohort or that virtual group. Stays with the office hours and advisory and planning time on the Wednesdays that we don't have testing or school, and those include the 4 Wednesdays in May. We have our standardized testing on April 7th, 14th, and 21st. And then April 28th, we have a regular A day for school on that Wednesday, the 28th. June 2nd, we have our final, or we have a regular school day as well on that Wednesday. It does include the concurrent teaching model that we just started last week on Monday on the 15th. There are some concerns related to the restarting that I'd just like to share at the outset here. You know, working with staff through the planning process, I think one of them, three categories really that I put them in. One would be instruction, and just thinking through that concurrent instructional model that we started last week, Monday. We would anticipate, much like the data Dan showed, that we would have more students come back with the face-to-face 4-day-a-week offering. And being so new in this concurrent teaching model, one of the concerns is that virtual cohort. So being able to be attentive to that virtual cohort and still engage that group and give them an equitable experience compared to the students who are face-to-face. You know, if we're up to 20 students in the classroom face-to-face, that's going to become more challenging, especially with the newness of the model. No one's done this one before, not here. So that's a concern. The face-to-face experience with the 70-minute blocks, you know, if we just look at best instruction, we know that students learn best if they're interacting with each other and the content, and we have that kind of sweet spot for intellectual struggle, and that's when time flies in a classroom. And given the restrictions in terms of distancing, masks, that's going to be more of a challenge. And people in the classroom and at home, those interactive lessons and that best practice, even in that 70-minute block, staff and teams are struggling to kind of get their heads around what that looks like, engaging both in school and at home. So that'd be the first area that, you know, a lot of conversation has taken place around at the high school. The second one, I think Dan hit on, and we had a chance to talk to the board members that came out last week. And those are on those factors around mitigating risk. And so thinking about that physically distancing, and even though we're in that low or moderate, new definition there of low or moderate risk based on positive tests, based on number of people testing positive. As we sat in classrooms last week, it became apparent, one of the board members, I can't remember who commented, they just said, you know, people are bigger at the high school, they take up more space. And we're estimating 18 to 20 in a classroom could be 3 feet apart most of the time. Becomes much more challenging if we go greater than that 18 to 20 area. Currently we're at 12, and we can go approximately 6 feet apart with 12, but it's the hallways and lunch then that we're not physically distancing either. Lunch is a concern with students not wearing masks, having those 2 lunch sittings of potentially 300 to 400 students in that area for about a half hour without the masks. So in terms of the safety pieces, that would be the concerns there. The last one that I would want to bring up is just, you know, around the pace of change and mental health of the staff. And as a high school administrator for almost 25 years, I feel like I have the kind of pulse of where staff are at. And you know, the reopening committee, we met 10 times throughout January and February on top of our regular coordinator meetings, and planning that hybrid model and just thinking through all aspects of it. You know, we had 3 question and answer sessions with staff. I think the first one was 1 hour and 40 minutes. We were fortunate that we had those 3 PD days to plan, and those were super productive and really helped us hit the ground running last week. So that was in preparation for that hybrid model. And then we had the launch last week, Monday on the 15th. And after the first day of the launch, we had our coordinators meeting, and we looked at the models we looked at possible schedules for coming back 4-day face-to-face, and just kind of feel I wouldn't say deflated, but just kind of exasperated at the pace of we just got 1 day of concurrent under our belt. Can we exhale here? And I know that a lot of people watching tonight from the outside, it might not feel like things are moving at a fast pace. I can say from the inside, where teachers are still selectively planning curriculum and looking for the high leverage standards to really focus on with students, and either creating or adapting lessons in new formats and learning new technology and doing their best to engage students first online and now online and in the classroom, and trying to fight that battle to have a more student-centered instruction that they've always strived for. You know, on the inside with that going on, I can say that it does feel like things are moving quickly because everything is new each day. My observation is just it's been, it's kind of like the airplane analogy, right? Where you take the oxygen yourself first so that you're available to help others. And what I see in the building is that people aren't taking that oxygen first to help others. They're looking to give other people oxygen and reach out to students and each other. So I guess, you know, in terms of the process and the discussions at the high school, those would be the three areas that have surfaced pretty frequently in our planning and thinking forward toward a 4-day week.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McGrath. And Ms. Langer, if you would like to speak a little bit to the middle school.
Yeah, Mitch, excellent job. I totally agree with everything that Mitch said. We're very much in line with our concerns. And I would just like to say also thank you for coming to GDS last week. It was nice to have you in our building. Staff really appreciate it as well. And I would also like to say that, you know, we can do this. We can make this happen. Mitch already has a schedule in mind at GDS. That's one of our biggest hurdles. That's one of our biggest challenges. We do not have a schedule in mind. Our biggest challenge is making a schedule. We have 5th grade coming back, 107 5th graders coming back to 4 days a week on April 5th. And I asked our 5th grade teachers to have grace and be patient with a schedule for their related arts. Kind of dependent on tonight's meeting and the outcome of it, because I don't want to have to change the schedule, you know, 2 times for them again between now and the middle of April. So we do not have a schedule made yet, and our schedule is dependent on a little bit on Mitch's. And so we still have that to figure out yet. One of the big parts of our schedule also is how our music will operate. We have been operating virtually with music and wanting to bring them back in a capacity. And they have some great ideas, but we have a lot of work to do in that area. So I'm sure that Lisa will be a big help with that. So we have some things that we need to work out with the schedule. So that's one area of concern for us. The other area of concern is from staff. The staff just want to make it, I think they echo very much what Mitch said, but staff want to make sure that the board and parents understand that, you know, with the CDC guidelines of 3 feet of social distancing, like we probably won't have that in our classrooms. If our classrooms get over 20, we won't be 3 feet apart in all of our classrooms. And then I was also hoping that Dane County would come out with their new order, because we won't, when students are eating, there's no way they'll be at 6 feet with their masks off. So, you know, there's things that we just won't be able to do. We'll try to do our best with students eating and keeping them moving, and really try to work on the other mitigation systems of having them hopefully, you know, as far apart as possible and keeping them facing the same direction if we can, and trying to keep it under 15 minutes. And just kind of keeping them moving through and getting them outside. But that's a concern for us. We just can't do that. Kind of like Mitch talked about. In the hallways, as much as we try to keep our kids at 6 feet apart, and we stand out there and we say, you guys, just a little bit apart, they naturally just are right next to each other. So it's, they do, one thing that they're doing a fantastic job of is they're really good about wearing masks. And so I'm glad that that's like the #1 strategy, because our students are doing an excellent job of that. So that was one area that staff really wanted to talk about. And then the other area is exactly like Mitch talked about too, that we've been spending time talking about, is just the instructional model and trying to make sure that we are reaching our virtual students as well as our students that are in front of us, and making sure that we're putting out high quality instruction that's reaching everybody and we're meeting everybody's needs. For us, our core classes were about 60 minutes long. As I start to try to put together this puzzle, we'll probably be back up to core classes about 90, 80 to 90 minutes long. And just trying to make sure that we can, our students have the stamina and the ability virtually to, maintain engagement, and, that our teachers have time to work with each other, to talk about successes, things that are working, how to keep kids engaged, how to do grouping, how to, break up the time to keep kids involved. And so I had a great conversation with a couple of our 7th grade teachers this afternoon of ideas of, that have been working for them and how we can share with other staff. So just trying to work things out. So we're confident, and we can use our time wisely, and we can make sure that we're providing good teaching and learning to our kids through a model that's really fresh to us. So.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Langer. So I think at this point, maybe we're ready to move on to questions from board members, so we can focus on the things that you really have questions or concerns that you want to address tonight.
Elizabeth?
Thanks, Andrew. Hey, Dan, can we get a staff vaccine update?
Sure. So what I can share is that all of our staff who have signed up to get their vaccine through Public Health, Madison-Dane County, have had an opportunity to schedule an appointment and receive, and that's the J&J, so it's a 1 dose.
Okay.
Other staff members have chosen on their own to go through other providers where they might have had one of the other 2 with the 2 doses, and so depending on that. But every staff member, has had an opportunity to.
Great, thank you.
Do we have a rough number on that, Dan? Just 50%, 20%?
Now, as we talked about before, we're not tracking,
There's some, Susan, there are some people that may not take it, and that's truly like confidential, and we can't force them to, so that wouldn't be a number to put out there. Susan Fox?
I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to just start with a couple. Chris, just to follow up, when you mentioned that the current 60-minute classes might have to go to 80 or 90, and that's because, how long is your day? What's your day currently at the middle school? I forget. I mean, is it that much of a longer day that?
Yeah, 6th to 8th grade is presently from 8:30 to 1:45.
Okay.
And we'll be moving from 8:30 to 2:30.
All right, so that's extra time. So that's a lot about that concern. And what we saw, I'm really glad we got that opportunity to come into both the middle school and the high school. It was very impressive to see how the teachers were using that technology, and all the rooms I was in, I can say the teachers really were making an effort to engage both the kids at home and the kids in person. And that's a concern I'm hearing a lot of from teachers, is once that number shifts, so that instead of having from 6 to 8 or so in a room at a time, up to some in 12, but that's relatively unusual right now, to 22 or so, because I agree, the percentages are going to go up over 70%. It'll be more like 75%. How much more difficult that is to try to continue to engage the students at home in the same way. And also, even with these longer class periods, and I didn't even think about the middle school going that long, the high school is talking about 70, that's still a longer period for kids to just be sitting, because again, they still can't interact. I think the other thing we have to be upfront about, I mean, in the middle school, they don't have individual desks, those are tables. So when you're sitting two kids at a table, they might be barely 3 feet apart. I'm not sure they really are, to be honest. In the high school classrooms, it became very apparent very quickly that once you get more than 12 kids in there, I don't think you can guarantee 3 feet in those rooms either. Again, bigger kids, most of them are at tables. I talked to someone from East High School who said what they did was they have all their old furniture stored, I guess, downtown, dragged up all these old desks, which they said are awful, but they're using them instead of tables to try to create a little more distance. But we don't even have the physical class sizes anymore to do that. So that's remains a concern. Lunch, I think, it seemed like at GDS there might be a little room. I know we talked a little bit about maybe putting a canopy over an area outside so the kids could sit outside when it's nice. At the high school, I'm not sure that's even realistic. Just watching the kids at the middle school, they were actually pretty well spaced when when we saw them coming to lunch. And at the high school, not so much once they get out in the hall. And they were respecting the one way in the hall, and they're kind of trying, but as you said, that their natural affinity is to walk together when they're leaving the building. That's just not how it's going to be. So I think we have to be pretty upfront about that the 3 feet thing is going to be an effort, but it's not likely that it's really going to happen very often. Another question about the HVAC. You mentioned the percentages of airflow. Jared, I don't know if you can translate into exchanges per hour or per day, or how does that translate in terms of, because I keep reading different information on that, or
yeah, so I don't have the exact number to tell you what the air percentage would be replaced on an hourly basis, but typically when you run the calculation, out of a 40 to 50%, at least the entire air every hour is being replaced out.
Okay.
But that obviously is not a scientific, that's just a rough estimate based
Right.
on working with Honeywell
Okay.
and NAMI, which is our mechanical vendor. But definitely we're bringing in a lot more outside air. And that's something that obviously, when we got really cold out, some of our buildings really experienced it being cold inside due to the fact that there's more outside air. And then when it gets warmer, we'll have to obviously monitor that, because then you have humidity that comes in. And there is a certain set point for humidity that obviously kills them. The higher the humidity is, then obviously there's the potential for viruses being killed, but then also you have the potential of mold growing. So, as we move into a cold season, to a spring, into a warm season, we have to monitor that as well. And most of our buildings do not have windows that open. So
Right.
that's the other reason that we're bringing in more outside air. So like if you look at some of these other school districts that have older buildings, they can open up their classroom windows, which allows them. And so they're only maybe running their outside air exchangers at 30 to 35%. And by us increasing it, we're bringing more in that way.
Okay, and then another related question, you mentioned or Dan mentioned the MERV filters from 8 to 14. I did have that question come to me about wondering if the MERV filters were in the classrooms and why, and there is a reason for that, I guess. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yep, so the higher the rating of the MERV, or the value of the filter, it's the less particles that can bypass it. So we do have some older HVAC and the size of the fan motors. So if you add MERV values of like 13 and 14s and 15s up to the maximum 16, there's the potential that those coils, so the air conditioning coils, could freeze up, or you could burn out the motors. So there are some areas that those fans are not designed for higher filter levels, because maybe it's an office complex where there's only one person in there. And so that's why you're seeing a range. So in one building, there might be a range from 10 up to 14, and it's not necessarily randomly, it's just depending on the size of unit that's happening. But we also are obviously trying to infiltrate more of that outside air to help with that lower value of the filter. Because one of the things that's probably really important is when you look at CDC, they're making the recommendation of the MERV value of at least 13. However, their concern is that, okay, you can go ahead and replace your filters with the MERV value of 13. But if you're restricting the airflow to that classroom, that goes against everything else that they're saying. So there's a combination of airflow into the class and a higher filter rating with that verb. So we're continuing to monitor that and work, review CDC, DPI, and then work with our vendors that provide that.
Okay,
Hey,
thanks.
Susan, can I ask one quick question on that? Jared, do we have any buildings with MERV filters that are below 10 right now, or are they all over 10?
No, we have a range from 8 to 14. So there are some buildings that have some 8 filters. And I can speak to the high school as they are at the high school and GDS as they start getting more capacity. They're being switched over to 10s, 11s, 12s, where those areas can happen because we're bringing in the capacity of more students.
And they'll be switched by within the next 3 weeks?
So what happens is filters always get replaced at the end of the month. And so with the plan of potentially bringing back 6, 12, 4 days a week, we would have those replaced out over spring break and they would be ready in April.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan.
I'll let somebody else go. I have a whole bunch more questions, but I'll let somebody else go and see if somebody else asks them.
Susan Manny?
Well, I have similar questions to Susan, so I'm hoping that we'll get those answered. I really sincerely appreciated the opportunity to be in the buildings and see the students in person. And I appreciate that Mitch has brought that up as something that he's having to seriously consider because, and we noticed this in the middle school as well, when you get into those science classrooms, at this point, they're not putting any kids at the lab tables, which I'm guessing you can use, but things were tighter for that. So I guess, again, also wanting to hear about the distancing and is this really possible? And having been at the high school, and in fact, I had looked at Mitch and kind of smiled because there were 2 people sitting right next to each other. I think one was a teacher. So, you know, we know that's going to happen, but I wonder how difficult that's going to be. I'd also like to hear a little bit from Mitch about the 70 minutes, and then significantly from Chris about the 70 minutes. Having sat with kids on the computer who are doing even synchronous virtual learning for 70 minutes, it was stressful. And then again, understanding that you're challenged by the lunches. And then maybe your thoughts about how you're going to handle music. I would just add that to the questions. So it's pretty much what Susan asked with maybe the addition of specific questions about music. But I'd really like to hear about those. I mean, in this environment, 70 minutes is a long time for a 12 or 13-year-old to sit and then come out and go back and do it again and then come out and do it again. So I'd appreciate any information on that, particular rationale and research.
So the 70 minutes, right now we are 50 minutes in the morning, and then we have our plus periods of 30 minutes each in the afternoon. So that breaks it up for students, and the format of that afternoon is a little bit different than the instruction in the morning, and teachers can use that creatively. The 70 minutes, one of our concerns, Susan, is exactly like you're expressing, just the stamina of the student at home. And so, it just presents another challenge for our teaching staff in terms of how do we structure our lessons now so that we're aware or we're cognizant of that stamina that student may or may not have at home. Maybe there's breaks. How do we structure the delivery of content and try to create lessons where, like I said, students are interacting with each other in the content and somehow both at home and in the classroom. So definitely a challenge. And that's why at the high school, with the schedule we proposed, we said, okay, we need to carve out time specifically for that green cohort, the cohort at home, to access teachers. And that would be that 9 to 9:45 area where everyone's in transit on their way to school, and teachers would be available to access from that green cohort. The music, orchestra would play, choir can sing with masks on, band, if it's nice. There's talk of carving out a spot outside to play some music, but currently not able to play inside.
Just to follow up with Mitch, so are you going to take us in and let us sit in a 70-minute calculus class in person?
You know what 10 minutes felt like, and those were pretty engaging.
I know.
But, you know, the 70-minute, it just does present some challenges. There's so many things that our teachers want to do when they have students face to face that they won't be able to do because of the restrictions in terms of, you know, physical distancing and not having students sitting right next to each other working on a task.
Mitch and Chris, real quick here. Because I'm long-term subbing, where's the time where you do the cleaning of the chairs in between the tables and chairs? Is that within that 70-minute of instruction? Because I know that where I'm at, we are scheduled for 80 minutes, but 10 minutes of that is taken away as I have to have the students stand up by their desk so I can spray, and then the bell rings and then they move, and then by that time the next class is ready to come in fresh. So I just want to know, is there cleaning involved in the transition of classes?
I'll just at the high school, Andrew, that's just a great example of what I was saying earlier in terms of it feels like things are moving fast because this is our 5th day in this concurrent model. And so those routines are still getting carved out. But generally, what's happening is it's at the end of the class period that the teacher is they're wiping down those high contact surface areas. And so that might take a little bit longer, you know, certainly with 20 students as opposed to 6 or 7. I don't know that it'll take the full 10 minutes. Your experience would tell us a little bit more about that, I guess.
Oh,
but it's
definitely.
generally at the end of the class period is when we are doing that sanitization at the high school. And then there's spraying at the high school on Tuesday evenings and Friday evenings.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Lorraine?
I appreciated the tour as well. My question is around lunch. If you can kind of walk me through what lunch looks like with staff, you know, having to monitor students that are obviously without their mask.
At our school, we have our staff, not our teaching staff, monitor students. We have all of our administration, our student services, as well as some of our EAs and SEAs. And we also, that's kind of the group that is monitoring our students. So our adults are in masks and we are able to pretty much keep our distance, you know, our 6 feet distance from students. So right now we do have a couple grade levels in classrooms, but hoping to now when we go down to 3 feet here, and I think we probably need to wait for Madison-Dane County to make that order. We would like to get those guys at least out of when we're in cohorts, get them back in the cafeteria even before we come back to 4 days a week. So we are trying to get kids in the cafeteria. I'm struggling a little bit with kids in the classroom. I think it's a little bit tight in there. I also think it's just not as clean in there as I would like it to be. So I prefer them to be in the cafeteria. So we're trying to get them back in the cafeteria. And we're trying, and they move, for the most part, most middle school kids take like 7 minutes to eat their lunch. But you know, then there's a few that want to take 20 and we want that to be okay too. We want it to, you know, be able to have that flexibility.
We've talked a little bit about classrooms also, but similar to Chris, I don't know that it's better, and it creates a whole nother workflow in terms of garbages being out in the halls and garbage on the floor, and just not a good situation there, I don't think, for kids and for the keeping the building clean. So at the high school, still working on what that would look like, but essentially we need seating for 350, I'm guessing, in our lunchroom. And we would want them at tables, all sitting the same, facing the same direction, and as spaced as we possibly can be. I'm going to guess, you know, that 3 feet likely wouldn't be possible with 300. So that's what that looks like. We would have admin supervising our lunch. We may have to assign some of the teachers that are assigned lunch supervision, or pull them off another supervision duty if we don't need that one fulfilled. So the 2 lunches could be a case where we have some teaching staff helping to supervise as well. Now we think, okay, nice weather. Hopefully some students do go out for lunch or choose to eat outside. But being May and being Wisconsin, I picture worst case scenario. It's raining. No one wants to leave. Where are we all going to go? And we need to have a plan for that. We need to have seating for everyone.
Oh, you said raining. I was thinking about snowing.
That could happen too in May.
So Mitch, I just want to get clarity. So there wouldn't be any students in the high school that would be eating in the classrooms, right? Or
that certainly wouldn't be our choice. We'd like them in the lunchroom and all facing the same way and close to the exit if they want to go outside.
Okay, thanks.
Eric?
I have a couple of questions, some that have been already asked, but I just want to get some clarification. So I have 4 quick questions. Well, they're not going to be quick, but with the 70-minute time period, what is the why of its 70 minutes? Why can't it be 50 minutes? What is the reasoning behind the 70 minutes and why it has to be so long? I'm curious what that is.
I think to be transparent on that one, Eric, our busing situation drives that in terms of when we can get here and when we can let out. And so 70 is kind of that sweet spot for the transportation piece.
So is there a solution to get it to 50 minutes? Is that solution an increase in transportation? There's got to be some sort of problem solving to try to lower that 70-minute kind of instructional period. I just don't think 70 minutes is productive. And I'm just wondering if any thought has been, maybe thinking outside the box of how we can lower that.
Can I add one point about the transportation issue? Because it's been mentioned to me by a couple of people that Forest, Oregon, and McFarland are all expanding to 4 days, but they're all keeping their half days and they are dismissing kids before lunch and they're able to do it. McFarland only has 2 buses for their high school. We have 9. So a big piece of it is the fact that we have the 2 communities. Cottage Grove is really spread out and it just requires more buses. Mm-hmm. So we're kind of locked into that. Waunakee is the only one that is going longer than the half day. And they, according to something I just read today, spent about $50,000 on new tables in order to space them out and be able to do that. We aren't situated to do that either right at the moment. And I don't know where we so unfortunately, my understanding of it is that the schedule is really what's driving it. I mean, you'd have to have like just a study hall somewhere, which is more sitting. So to me, 70 minutes, there would have to be minimally built in some kind of get up, stretch, move around at your seat though. And that's kind of a poor substitute, but I agree. I think it is a problem. And when I think of middle school, I didn't even realize till we got here tonight that middle school might even be longer. It's hard for me to fathom, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I can think of a couple, ideas to help that. If it's a transportation as a piece that's causing the 70 minutes, you can still take the 70 minutes and divide that up and create an additional 20 minutes of whether it's a study hall or an activity to lower that amount of time. I think that's, a thing of that admin would need to look at for schedules, but I don't think it's impossible. My guess is the teachers would have a lot of good ideas on how to, allocate that time. So I guess my request would be to go back to the teachers and see if there's any feedback that they have regarding the 70 minutes and if they can get to 50 minutes. So I'm just going to leave that question there for people to think about.
Can I talk about that for a minute, Eric?
Yeah, sure.
So like I said, I met this afternoon with a couple 7th grade teachers who have taught in the 90-minute block for quite a while. And I talked to them about how it's going, you know, with the concurrent model. And what they talked about is we can't look at it like we're teaching for 90 minutes. Nobody wants anybody to teach for 90 minutes. What we have to look at it is, you know, providing instruction, and it's instruction is inclusive of learning, right, for that 90 minutes. So how are we going to break up the 90 minutes like you're talking about? And so it's really, they're using a lot of the philosophies they used in virtual teaching, in the all virtual teaching, but then they have, you know, many students in front of them. So they are breaking up their time periods, and the whole, I've talked to all of our staff about, yes, when you're in the classroom and you need to stay socially distanced, sometimes the kids are kind of like need to stay by their desk, but you're not ever you're free to get up and take your class for a walk, or go outside, or take breaks and things like that. And if your students that are virtual, they need to probably do the same thing, you know, like, so we need to think outside of the box, and we need to think about, you know, grouping, and we need to think about having time to read, and having time for kids to work on their own and in different groups and in pairs, and how we do that, being 3 feet apart, being 6 feet apart, some being virtual, some being in person. Those are the different kind of things that we need to think through and be able to do. And 90 minutes can lend itself to that. So it's really about making time for staff to share their successes in doing that. And what would have helped here is just a little bit more time in the concurrent model, so they had more successes to share with each other, you know, before having to turn around so quick. But I understand having to turn around so quick as well when we have state testing and the end of the school year is right around the corner. So it's kind of just like so many things that are moving quickly.
Yeah, let me just, Susan, Manny, can I just finish? I had 4, but I'm just going to do one more and I'll come back to my other 2. Because you mentioned this, my other one, one of the ones was the standardized test. So my question was, the standardized test is, DPI is not going to count any tests against school districts this year. Is it a possibility that we can even opt out of that? I don't see really any beneficial purpose for our students to be taking a standardized test coming back the first couple of weeks from a pandemic. It doesn't make any sense to me. And quite honestly, the scores aren't going to matter anyways. I'd rather that time be focused on instruction and the implementation of a new plan of getting back to in-person learning. So Dan, is that something that we have the option to do?
Unfortunately, no. I agree with you completely that if we had a preference, if we had an option, we absolutely would not do them, but we are mandated. Likewise, DPI didn't want to do that, but they were not able to get a waiver. So it basically starts with federal law, the Department of Ed, requiring states to do their testing. So it's not an option we have to offer.
And our state legislators who are not willing to budge on it either.
Right. And I'm proctoring in Sun Prairie. So yeah, they said that they can't opt out. They told the virtual students that they're going to have a day they have to come in as well. They can't opt out.
All right, I would just remind everybody, the public and the community, that the scores will not be counted against the districts this year for the state. So even though we have to do the standardized tests, any scores that are below the threshold of proficient are not going to count against the district. And with that, I'll yield and let somebody else answer.
Susan Manny.
Well, again, you know, when you have the information that was presented in a really great presentation to the Teaching Learning Equity Committee, and you pick up the State Journal front page, and you look at the failing grades rising during COVID-19, and now you're going to make these same students sit in a 70 to a 90-minute structure. Beyond the student, you're asking a teacher who is streaming to the virtual students as well to expand the number of students they're addressing and engaging. And Chris gave some great ideas for what you do, and that works fine for a day or two, but you're talking about them to be major innovators with this time frame every single day. So again, and I know Susan and the other parents can think about this, but I had 3 entirely different types of students as our children. And all 3 of them, knowing that they could adapt and be pretty good students, would have struggled with this kind of time frame under these circumstances. So
You hit mute.
on purpose, as a board to, again, Mitch has stated this concern as well. And we were only in those classes for 10 or 15 minutes. And I think it was challenging to us to stay focused. So again, it continues to be a concern of mine.
Susan.
Well, I think, that was exactly one of the things currently in the blocks at the high school, for example, they don't teach for 90 straight minutes. I mean, a lot of the class is activities and small group work, but that's what the teachers are saying they can't really do under this model because they have to at least try to maintain the 3 feet, which is going to be a challenge and I predict not really possible. But once you you can't really have kids work in groups. The science teachers are saying they can't do labs because they can't share equipment. Currently, what some of them have been able to do or have planned to do, I don't know in the first week how much they really got to do, but with some kind of lower key activities that the kids at home virtually could do as well, but with only 5 or 6 in the class physically, you can do that. You have enough materials and the kids at home have their own materials and they can do it. But once you put 20, even doing that kind of activity won't work. And realistically, I think you can look at every high school class being from 20 to 25 or so. I mean, it's going to vary. I mean, some because of the different mixes of kids, but I think it's safe to say, just looking what's happened statewide, what's happened in our district, going to elementary, that we're only going to have maybe 25% staying virtual. That's still a lot of kids that we still need to serve. And the concern is, how do you keep, the teachers are working very hard right now to engage those kids as well as the kids in their classroom, but you put that many more kids in a classroom and you're still trying to engage those kids at home, that becomes very difficult. It's not, I would guess, in any of our teachers' nature to stand kind of relatively still like they have to do now under these circumstances. So not only is 70 minutes stressful for the students, or to 80 or 90, but it's also stressful for a teacher who pretty much has to stay up there in the front of the room. So I have real concerns about that. I think that's a big concern for all of them because they do want to reach all of the kids. And the question is, how do you do that? They've really worked over a period of a couple months to plan for this current plan. And as Mitch said, day one of it, they go to a meeting and find out they might now be having kids 4 days a week. And it's just really a lot to ask. The other thing I have the floor, looking at the calendar, for the high school, realistically, we have about 5.5 weeks left, starting on April 26th, 4.5 for seniors because their finals are a week early. Out of their testing days are mostly on Wednesdays, I guess. There you do have the AP testing that affects those students for a couple weeks in May, the first 2 weeks in May. There are a couple others, Memorial Day in there. There's another week, there's another missing day at the end of April. I guess, yeah. So, they're not even getting like whole weeks of 4 days each, or currently 2 days each per person. So we all know how the end of the year is. Those last couple weeks, the first 2 weeks in June, last couple weeks of school are kind of a winding down, final exams at the high school. So it's really not a lot of time. And I guess that's my other concern. I think this is a lot of upheaval and a lot of stress. And I'm not sure, if we think about, is this really going to impact kids in terms of their academics? I'm not sure I'm seeing that. Is it going to impact their mental health? It might. It's hard to know. I mean, I think I think it's been very important to have at least the 2 days per week back. But, if we could do the 4 days per week half days, I'd be more comfortable. I am concerned about the lunches, and these are older kids. And even though, we're in good shape right now in our community in terms of spread, but we do want to keep it that way. You know, and as far as the pace of all of this, it has seemed really fast. And, you know, a couple of people have mentioned what they see as a lack of forward planning. I do want to remind people that, I know not you guys, but whoever is listening, that we really couldn't talk about these changes until the guidelines changed. I mean, that happened, you know, very recently that we were even able to consider another change. So that's because we've committed to being safe. We've been cautious. We've been conservative. All of our staff members have worked very hard, as have our families, frankly. But everybody's worked very hard to make this work. And then it feels like all of a sudden another change right on top of it. And that's a lot for people to handle. So I guess, you know, I don't know, I think a lot of things to think about here that are more problematic than I thought they'd be when we first started talking about, you know, as I might have mentioned to Dan, I thought when we talked about having a conversation about going to 4 days, in my mind, I was thinking it would be later down the road. And then of course, when it was scheduled for tonight, I thought, really? And then I looked at the calendar, thought, well, yeah, we have to have it now if we're going to have it, but it feels pretty rushed.
Yeah. Eric?
Yeah, well, it is rushed. I mean, time is not something we have on our side with all this. So unfortunately, there's not much we can do about that. Let me ask a couple of my other questions that I had. And one of the things was the static learning recommendations that is it, and this is to both Mitch and Chris, is it possible to have the static groups per the CDC and Public Health Madison-Dane County guidelines if we move to this model? Is that possible, or it seems like it would be a challenge?
The only way, you know, talking with other principals in the conference, Eric, around that, the only model that was considered at one point by any school in the district or in the conference was to bring students in and have them report to their homeroom and stay in their homeroom for the entire day. And they would be there with their Chromebook and their headphones, and they would be live streaming lessons. The homeroom teacher would be actually teaching his or her classes from that homeroom. So essentially they'd all be there in the homeroom, but they'd really be you know, learning virtually. And they wouldn't be shuffling the deck or shifting throughout the day. Other than that, I haven't come across any other model that would allow us to stay static and rotate teachers or anything like that. You know, each time you go to a new classroom at the high school, you're with probably 70% new students, and so it just, there's no way to schedule that.
And you agree, Chris?
Yeah, the only thing that is a little bit different with the middle school is if we could do kind of the DeForest model where we did go to half days, we can keep our kids pretty static in their teams. So we have teams of 3 or 4 classes, you know, like their core courses. If we could do their cores when they're in school and then keep their encores and their musics virtual, then we would be more static.
Then, Andrew, I have 2 more real quick.
Okay.
Quick. I shouldn't say that. I know. So the equity issue with the virtual now, as we slowly move to hybrid models or even full day models, for the rest of the year, we're certainly going to have a group that's going to be virtual. It's probably going to be 25% or around that a month. And it does seem like the equity lens switches a little bit and shifts now, as it was more for the in-person and the hybrid. Now it's shifting to the virtual learners in that model. So my question, and this is probably for you, Dan, is it possible to have teachers that are solely virtual and then other teachers who are doing in-person, so we don't have teachers doing the concurrent, both of them at the same time? Because I do think it would make a difference if there's some way that we could do that.
Yeah, and as you know, that's the model that we have at the elementary, and which we really think is a superior model to help support our virtual learners. The challenge, of course, at the middle and high school is that you don't have enough sections of every course that we offer that it would work out that you have, X number of virtual teachers. And so, first of all, I mean, completely redoing the entire master schedule, but then, you would really have to limit it to certain courses where there are multiple sections. And so that you would not be able to continue on with the schedule as is. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, we could hire more teachers. I mean, I'm not saying that we could do that, but that would solve that problem, correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you started a school year with that model in mind and set the schedule that way and the staffing to do that, I mean, that's what it would take.
Okay.
Yeah, even then we have high school singletons where there's a single section of something. And I mean, I can't even picture that, frankly, at the high school level. Maybe at the middle school, but not the high
Another
school.
challenge in there is certification. So if you take science, you need physics, you need chemistry, you need biology. It's not just broad field science. And so start to run into limits in terms of what teacher that you've pulled out, what they can instruct. And kind of like Dan said, mid-year we'd be redistributing students to how many classrooms. It really would be recreating a master schedule.
And then my last one, and thank you for giving time, Andrew and the rest of the board, is the lunch issue, which seems to be maybe the biggest challenge of all this, aside from the scheduling, as far as the safety issues are concerned. And I'm wondering, I brought this up before in previous meetings, and when I visited the schools, I also brought it up, has there been any progress or thoughts about potentially moving lunches? I know it's Wisconsin, but we're pretty, resilient here with our weather and the way that we've grown up. So, a 50-degree day in Wisconsin or a 45-degree day in Wisconsin is not that big of a deal to be outside eating. So is it possible, or has there been some options that have been presented or thought about to move some options for students to be eating lunch outside, whether that means we have a tent or we have areas in the parking lot with picnic tables? Has any of that been discussed? I guess that's to Dan, Chris, and Mitch.
Yeah, I can answer that. And the answer, absolutely. Without question, if we could get the kids outside, far safer. And so, the logistics of where would we be? Would we have tents? Would we have whatever? But no doubt that would be an option that we would really pursue strongly to try to make happen.
Because I do think that there's some options there that we could explore that I think we could be successful with to lower that amount of risk for lunch. So.
Okay, Peter.
I listened to everybody, listened to Chris, listened to Mitch, and one of the first things you said, Mitch, was that there's a bunch of unresolved questions about, how the concurrent model is working, and that's totally understandable. And it just sounds to me when I listen that it doesn't seem to me like we're ready. There are unresolved questions. We're just adopting one model and then we're asking to go to a different one. I worry very much about, people think, well, the teachers have to learn the technology. No, that's the easy part. Teachers have to learn techniques from each other and how to teach in these models. And that's a lot of time and effort. It's the technology of teaching, not the technology of broadcasting. That's the hard part. And I'm very concerned that we're having our teachers spend all the time, I have to teach it this way, now I have to teach it that way, rather than focusing on teaching and learning, their students teaching and learning. They're busy learning themselves. And that can't not be disruptive. It can't be without some deficit, some loss to the instruction we're providing to students in the classroom. Particularly when I hear, we don't have a schedule yet at the middle school. 70 minutes, is that right for students? Is it not right for students? It's just like there's just so many questions. And it's not about the safety, and it's not about the social distancing and so on. It's about the teaching and learning that's going to be going on. And so it's a little hard, given I think what is these unresolved questions in the current state. It's a little hard for me to say, oh, go ahead with this without knowing more, without us understanding that we're in a better place than we need, because we need to be in a better place, I think, than we are right now. I think everybody got to most of my questions, but I would like us somehow to be reassured that we can proceed with this, that we're not overburdening the teachers with too much change compared to the teaching and learning that they're trying to do. To be honest, what I would like to see is a 4-day model that builds on what we've learned from so far with opening now, with our concurrent model, the way we do things today with our hybrid model, so that there's less disruption what the teachers have to do. So we don't change, but we just build on what we're doing. And I'd like to see if we could find a way to do that if we're going to go bigger. And maybe it's the half day, 4 days a week. We talked about in the high school, well, we'd have to change the master schedule. Well, to do a thing where you have some teachers virtual and some teachers in the classroom. But maybe if we think about, well, what classes can we do that in? And then we reduce the number of teachers that have to do this concurrent teaching, for example. In math, in some classes, I'm not going to name any classes, we can split them up and have some teachers virtual, some teachers in classrooms. But for most of the classes, but for 10% or 20% of the class, or 20% of the classes, then we're going to have a teacher doing concurrent. Well, we've just eased the burden on most of the teachers if we do that. So I'm hoping that we can think creatively ways to build on what we're doing and do this with, like I said, less disruption. But I'm very much concerned that changing once and then changing twice, just for the sake of being aggressive about moving forward, I'm not sure that it takes us ahead more than it takes us backwards. That's my comment.
Susan Fox.
Just listening to you, Peter, I think some of what you said in terms of thinking about some people teaching virtually is something we should maybe think about a little bit for next fall, because I'm thinking we may still have some kids who want to be virtual next fall. I don't know. But to me, to do that this year for about 4.5 weeks sounds like total upheaval again. I mean, high school teachers also build relationships with their students. We've had to change some of our elementary kids have been changed 3 times so far. Our high school kids just started with these teachers at the second semester. Middle school, I guess, has had mostly the same teachers except for some encores through the year, but it's all upheaval. What you just described to me sounds like just as much upheaval.
Well, I'm making 2 points. One is I want to reduce the upheaval, and 2, if we might need to get creative about building on what we're doing now.
Right.
I'm not suggesting a new one. I'm just suggesting that maybe we look at this creatively. And yes, it means that all the teachers aren't going to be in the same situation, maybe, and it's going to be more a challenge for some than others. But let's do what we can. If we're going to move forward with full time, I want to do whatever it is that reduces the disruption, gives us the easiest model, the smoothest implementation going forward, because I think that's important educationally. It's important to teaching and learning, which we need to focus on.
Well, I feel like the smoothest would be if we could keep the half days, and since we've been told we can't, that's anyway.
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Exactly.
So I'm not disagreeing with you, Peter, that like at this moment we're maybe not ready. I think the question that I have is that not our responsibility to like get ready and to be ready, right? And when I think about, this idea that in normal life, right? It's kids in school 5 days a week for a full day, essentially. And, here we are right now. And if there's an opportunity for us to increase, right, to move to normal, do we not have a responsibility to sort of figure that out and try to make it work? And what I see in front of us from our administration and from the folks that talked here, that yes, there are things to figure out and still some questions that we have to have, but there is a pathway by which we can make it work. And so I guess that's my question there, is like, I understand the concerns and the nervousness and the barriers and all those kinds of things, but from my perspective, that is our job to solve. And so if we could spend some time sort of trying to figure some of those things out and solve some of those things, I think that would be really useful moving forward. The question I have actually is more for Jared. Can you talk me through transportation? Like, just like talk to me like I don't know nothing, because I don't, right? So like really talk me through why we have to have this particular model because of transportation. And yeah, like I just came to your office confused and lost, and I know nothing about busing. It shouldn't be too hard for you to imagine, Jared.
No, it's all good, Elizabeth. All right, so during a normal school year, non-pandemic time, high school starts at 8, about 7:58. So our Cottage Grove families that need to be transported into the high school ride the bus from Cottage Grove, and we drop off our high schoolers. Those buses proceed to be Winnequa elementary routes because school is starting at about 7:50. So we're dropping off high schoolers around 7:15, 7:20. And then they do that. In Cottage Grove, those buses are all serving all 3 schools. So in the morning, Taylor Prairie, Cottage Grove, and GDS are all combined on one bus, 4K through 8th grade. And then at the end of the day, Winnequa is released. Those buses run Winnequa routes. Those buses then proceed over to the high school, pick up the high school kids and take them to Cottage Grove. We do have a handful of buses that obviously pick up Monona kids and take them to GDS because of 6 through 8, but those typically only have 1 or 2 high schoolers on it that they'll drop off for Monona at the high school and then proceed to GDS. During the COVID situation, we have our elementary starting at 8:30. That was something that we decided early on. And so when we did that, we've tried to keep the cohorting separate. So we have Taylor Prairie having their own routes, Winnequa having their own routes, and then Cottage Grove School having their own routes. Then when we brought into the middle school and high school, the high school was at midday. So we had to keep those kids separate because we couldn't combine them with the Winnequa routes because Winnequa did not get out until 2:30 or they started at 8:30. So during a normal school year, all of our routes are pretty much double runs, which means that they do one school and then they proceed to the next. And at the same time, in the middle of the day, we are doing our midday 4K routes. A couple in Monona and then a couple in Cottage Grove. Then as we look at COVID, we have been trying to cohort those buses, like I said, so we've maintained Taylor Prairie separately. But we have combined Cottage Grove and GDS. And as we load those kids, we try to do extra social distancing. So we try to keep the rows in between separated, and then only family units sit together. And then also so right now in the afternoon, the high school gets out at 12:45, at 12:35. Middle school gets out at 1:45 and elementary gets out at 2:30. So we're using buses that are running all over, and they're really doing, because we have to clean in between those cohorts as well. So it's not like we can use the high school buses necessarily to run Cottage Grove buses because obviously there's a time difference. So when we looked at what that would look like so right now at the high school level, we have approximately 5 buses that come in on Silver Day, and I think 4 buses that are coming in on Blue Day. And by combining those, yes, we can combine those kids, but we also are anticipating getting more enrollments to that, which means that we technically need about 8 to 9 buses. The biggest issue that makes us different than many of the other Dane County schools is that we do have 20 minutes that separates our two communities. And that puts a whole different burden on our transportation. And even when you look at our transportation budget, the number of buses, as Susan had mentioned, like McFarland, they have 2 high school buses, even in a normal school year. We're up to 9 on a normal year. And even as we plan for this reopening, social distancing on school buses are still going to be challenging. We're not going to have rows empty in between. It's going to be a minimum of 1 kid every seat, with the potential of having 2 kids per seat. So that's where it becomes, and then at the same time, as we experience having struggles hiring substitutes to come in the building, hiring school bus drivers during a normal year is a challenging feat to have. And so as most of our school bus drivers have second jobs, and so school bus driving is typically done in the early morning, early afternoon or late afternoon, and they can have a job in between. And as COVID sort of had laid some of those bus drivers off from their second job or their other job, as the community or as the economy starts to reopen, those individuals are starting to get called back in. So we're also starting to experience that midday route difference and just having that. And so that's part of the reason that we've had to expand the number of hours of when the buses can run.
Thanks, Jared. That's really helpful. So, I mean, it sounds like it's not possible to run 4 half days.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if we had individuals that chose that they didn't need transportation and we could guarantee that was going to happen, then that would be a whole different conversation.
Sure.
But we can't, we don't want to send out a survey saying it's half a day and then all of a sudden we need 12 buses, and that's just not going to happen.
Okay. Thanks, Jared.
Lorraine?
Sure. So I think mine is just more a comment. I really do have concerns with the current model for a couple reasons. One is the engagement piece. I have a struggle sitting through a Zoom for 60 minutes. So I can only imagine students 70 minutes plus, how they can stay engaged. Even if you're creative, I think that's really difficult. The second reason is preparation. I think for staff, this is a short amount of time to prepare. And the other issue is the 3 feet social distancing. I think that's a real challenge. You're having 20 kids in a classroom and maintaining that 3 feet is just a challenge. So those are just really some major concerns for me.
Eric?
I was going to make the motion, Peter. If you want to go before me, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, but I have to disagree with what you said, which is
That's okay, Peter. You're allowed to disagree with me.
I don't think we have an obligation to get back to normal. We have an obligation to get back to provide the very best education for our kids. And if getting back to normal is doing that, then, well, maybe we should consider that. But we have to recognize that transitions always come at costs. And the question is, what's our goals here? Do the costs outweigh the benefits? Doing a 4-day for a few weeks at the end of the year, what's the benefit of that, and what's the cost? There's always costs, particularly when we do changes and transitions, and we always have to consider that. And that's where I'm at, is that it doesn't sound to, if we're not prepared, it's a little difficult for me to say, oh yeah, this is definitely better. If we don't have really good plans in place, this is definitely better and we should move to those, knowing the fact that there's some downside to this. That's my concern.
Susan Manning?
I heard Eric mention about making a motion, and as a board member tonight, I would like administration to go back and sit down and seriously consider the concerns they've identified and the concerns we've identified, many of those being the same, and seriously consider whether or not there's another way to do this that is better for the teachers and students. If after that, is there anything else we can do? They come back to us, and again, we can schedule a meeting next Monday night. We can schedule one Thursday. I mean, I just want them to come out of our environment, sit down with each other and say, is there anything else we can do? They've confirmed our same concerns. So is there anything else we can do? Is there anything else we can explore? I'd rather do that than try and move forward tonight.
Eric?
Well, I am going to make that motion because I think obviously we can discuss and vote after I make it. So I'm going to make a motion that the board approves phase 5 of the updated 2020 and 2021 reopening plan as presented.
Second.
All right, is there any further discussion?
So,
Can I just add to,
Yeah.
Just real quick, and then I'll let everybody else discuss. I just wanted to point out some of the things improvements that we've made to get to this point. And one of the most important things is the vaccines. And we now have teachers that are vaccinated. So that's incredibly important to the success of getting back to an in-person learning. We have a lower amount of cases in the county. We have lots of previous data of success in other school districts, not only in Wisconsin, but all over the United States. Many school districts in our own state that have stayed open during this time. We have new guidelines that are based on a lot of research from both the CDC and the Public Health of Madison-Dane County. And most importantly, out of everything, is serving the needs of our students and our community, who overwhelmingly have voiced their concerns based on the 74% going back to K-5 and 55% going back from the middle school and high school. There are some challenges we have. I would like to see more teacher input and communication collaboration with staff. Obviously, transportation is a challenge. The 70-minute class periods are a challenge, static groups, and certainly lunch. I think that we can solve those issues and move forward with that. So with that, I'll open it up to everybody else.
Susan Manning, then Elizabeth.
So now here we are as a board of 7 people. We're trying to build a solution, a pathway. And this, again, I'm really sorry, but this makes me feel very, very sad for the students. And instead of trying to build a pathway with the 7 of us and take even another 24, 48, 72 hours to try and find that pathway, we're going to make a motion that is going to force board members possibly to vote no, when in fact we support going back in every way. We just want to try and do it better. And again, the thought of trying to make the motion now before we really got to a point where we as a board felt comfortable with this is extremely uncomfortable for me.
Elizabeth?
I appreciate that, Susan. And I am sorry that you're feeling uncomfortable, and I completely understand why. I think, from my perspective, when I hear us talk about, the teachers and the uncertainty and the students and the uncertainty and the families and the uncertainty, we have an obligation to provide some certainty and some clarity, right? And so my concern is, and if you'll recall, this is a similar concern that I had like back in the late fall, early winter, when we were talking about, pushing dates and sort of kicking the can down the road, is that what it creates is an ambiguity. And what we know is when there's ambiguity, that increases anxiety to folks that are already anxious and stressed. And so while I understand and I appreciate, and certainly if we had all the time in the world and we could go back and iterate and come out with, some perfect model, which to be quite frank, I don't think exists, right? Then I would be all for that. But from my perspective, we have to be able to say, yes, we're moving forward with this, or no, we're not, and then be okay with that so that everyone can settle in to the remaining weeks that we have with, okay, at least I know what it's going to look like moving forward. And so that was the reason why I seconded Eric's motion.
Susan Manning.
We can still do this. We can do this in every way. We can do this on the exact same dates. We can bring the students back. What I'm saying as a board member, and I challenge each and every one of you to convince me that we can't do it better for the students. I mean, so just so you know, again, this is too emotionally overwhelming. So imagine how our staff feels. Imagine how our parents feel about this. We want to go back in every single way, but we want to go back safe in every single way. I have 3 grandchildren who have had COVID. Is that not terrifying in your life? We have a board member whose father died of COVID. Is that not terrifying? Yes, we can go back on these days. Yes, we can. But I want administration to take one more step, one more look before I take this vote. And technically, I do not want to vote no on going back. I do not want to vote no on going back on these days. But you forced my hand, and I really am terribly uncomfortable with that. And one of the great things about being a good board member is listening and responding together in a way that benefits the students and the teachers. And I'm not sure we're there tonight.
Chris?
Can I just say that I think that if you guys delay this a few days or a week, then we're going to do something that staff is really going to regret, which is take away their spring break. Like, I don't think that's going to go over good. And I think that puts all of us at a huge disadvantage. We're not going to get staff input over spring break, and just pushing this back a week is not going to help us. I think that Mitch and I, while we are very much supportive of our staff, and we want you guys to hear their concerns, and we want our community to hear the concerns and be realistic about what they're signing their children up for, Mitch and I think are also very confident that we can do this. We will put a schedule together. We will make it work for the best of our students and our families. It is better for us to get moving now than to delay it, because delaying it just puts more pressure on all of us in a very short amount of time, whether it's state testing, spring break, the end of the school year. We already have 5th grade coming back in our building. You know, we're that middle child. Like, we need to figure out a schedule that's going to happen. Like, us continually changing is difficult for all of our teachers. And so I just would rather that we make a decision. If we know what we need to do, we will do it. Our teachers have already been brainstorming on it. I think that I don't want to delay it. Like, I don't think things are going to change. I think the biggest issue with our schedule is the busing. Like, if we can have some more flexibility with the busing, we can have more flexibility with our schedules. If we can't, and we have to make it work with the busing, that's kind of what we have to do.
Mitch, could we have your input on that?
I'm equally as confident in our ability to figure it out with the staff here. If it is really just delaying the inevitable, I would say we're better off with more time to get it done. If the vote is going to move in that direction in a week, that's a week that we have. That's, you know, a week less that we have to try to get ahead of the ball and do the things that we're talking about in terms of figuring out the details. Our main challenge at the high school is definitely with the lunch space and running that lunch period safely, and some of the other concerns that I mentioned earlier around the physical distancing.
Susan Fox.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, because that was kind of my sense. I mean, I know you batted around a lot of different, I mean, not a lot, but some different models before landing on this, primarily because of the transportation. So I think there's already been a lot of thought put into what would be possible and what wouldn't be. And I don't see any advantage to delaying, which is not the same thing as saying, I think this is a good move. I think one of the bottom line questions is, are we really going to be in a better place for all the parties, all the stakeholders with this decision than we are now? And I'm not convinced, I guess, is where I am. I don't want to put it off though. I don't see any value in that.
Can I just make one clarification?
Go ahead, Sean.
As far as with the safety component, while the CDC has changed to 3 feet for students seating, that doesn't change our contact tracing protocol. So for contact tracing purposes, it is still at that 6 feet distance. And I just wanted to make sure that the public was aware of that.
Peter?
Yeah, well, actually, what was one of my questions I wasn't asked, which is, how are we doing with contact tracing? Do we have, I mean, one of the things the CDC says you have to do, yeah, you can have schools, you can have 3 feet, spacing and so on, but you better have contact tracing and other things in place. How are we doing with contact tracing?
I would say we're doing an incredible job of contact tracing. And as we consider moving to 4 days, both at the middle and high school, there's been a lot of communication between our team and both Chris and Mitch's team to ensure that the protocols that we have in place are set to accommodate more students should that occur. I think what we're seeing at the district level is also mirroring what we're seeing in the Dane County level, in that we're seeing decreases across all categories that we are providing on our data dashboard. And I really just want to say a huge thank you to our health team, who does the vast majority of the calls home to parents and students and navigating those situations with families. And also a huge thank you to the families, because we send out a lot of emails, both instructionally and when you throw on the contact tracing emails as well, to get the responses back so that we are able to keep a very accurate tabulation of data is immensely helpful to not only for purposes of sharing, but also for the main reason of keeping all students safe as we return to the building.
And then,
Peter?
If I could ask Dan, based on the conversation you've heard tonight, what are your thoughts about the plan at this point, and where it is, where you are, what would you do? Is there anything you do differently? Did you like it as is? Just give us your thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, I mean, it has been expressed, many times tonight, time is one of the key challenges. And I truly, in looking and, reflecting on this school year and all the things that we've done and taken us to this point, I do truly believe in the phasing model, about how important that is, that we learn as we go along and adjust. And so I feel really confident right now with our 4K5 as we're ready to move into the 4-day a week, that they had an opportunity to go to the 2-day, for nearly 2 months, and then moving into that. And as you know, it's very different at the elementary. As it was also stated, if we do move forward with the 6-12, we will get it done and have a really, the best plan that we can. Ideally, it would have been nice to have time to evaluate and learn from the 2-day a week to incorporate that into our planning. If you were to approve this tonight, that will happen over the next 4 weeks. We will look at that timeline that we're set to open and continue to hit that mark, moving forward. So, at this point, there's, our staff was targeting that March 15th date for the 2-day. And so, so there was no planning with the 4-day with that group. I mean, that was the focus. And so in this short turnaround, we've done, a lot of discussion, and that would continue. So, so I hope that makes sense. I don't want to keep repeating what's already been said. The bottom line is, if we have to pick a date and move forward, and it's going to be a nonstop planning from that time, until the reopening.
What's the I also don't agree that if you're going to do something, that we should delay that. But what would the alternative be?
Yeah, I mean, at some point we get to the end of the school year, and for a major change for only a few weeks, back to when we at the beginning of the year, we were trying to determine what our criteria was for decision making. And one of the things early on was, does the trying to weigh the risk at that time, of the virus versus the academic gain. And we all certainly feel way better now than we did back, in November, December, about the safety, and we know so much more about that. So it isn't just all the logistical, but at some point, we get to the point of no return. And so I think if we're going to do something, this is really kind of the last opportunity. And the question is it worth it at this point that we need to make that decision?
Yeah, is it worth it? And to be honest, I'm not concerned about the logistics. I think the logistics and the safety and so on, I think, that's a relatively, I'm confident we can work that out reasonably satisfactory. There's always be some risk, but I think we can work that out. There's sort of the less tangible things that I'm more concerned about. The things that we don't, so we figure out how the kids eat lunch, but are we, like I said, are the individual teachers who are working on educating the kids, are they going to be able to do this, deliver the best instruction that they can? That's more of a concern.
Susan Fox.
And it looks like it's roughly 7.5 weeks minus 2 days for the middle school, 5.5 weeks minus 2 days for the high school, like 4.5 minus those same 2 days for seniors. So we're not talking about a lot of time. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
Susan Manning.
I want to make it very clear. I have no intent to change the date for getting these kids back. I think that's a critical issue. But I have great faith in the work that our teachers are trying to do under these circumstances. And again, I can't thank Mitch enough for taking us into those classrooms. Those teachers were just working incredibly hard to make that work. Now you're going to double the students in the classroom. You're going to add significant extra time to the time that they're in there. And they're going to have to connect with less virtual students. It just seems to me, I mean, we've got this kind of expertise at our administrative level to put them in a room and say, okay, it's kind of like when our buses quit running because Nelson's used the wrong gas. They're different gas that wouldn't run during low temperatures. There just seems to be a way to explore this in a way that can make it work a little better. And I totally support going back on these dates.
Any more questions or concerns before we vote? All right, hearing none. Eric?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Susan Fox?
No.
Susan Manning?
No.
Lorraine?
No.
And I am the last one. And listening to everything, I'm not going to sustain. I am going to, because I have some concerns and everything too, I'm going to vote no at this time. The noes have it, motion carries.
No, motion doesn't carry.
Does not carry.
And
Motion doesn't carry.
Yes. Motion fails.
the motion for, oh yeah, duh. Thank you. All right, motion fails.
Let me
Susan?
try this. And I really should defer to Susan Fox to put this together, but I think we should make another motion now to show our incredible commitment to getting these kids back on these dates but making it be studied better. And I'm looking for language that would give us a motion to be able to go forward and do that.
I'm not sure I think that's fair. I mean, I think the staff has already put in a lot of time, and I think that they felt this was the best they could come up with.
So how do we get the kids back?
Well, is it possible to make a motion for half days instead of full days for 4 days a week at the middle and high schools?
Dan, is that possible?
The motion is not on the schedule. It was
Right.
the day of return. We're still, what we shared tonight was our planning thus far and tentatively what we think the schedule would look like. So I guess I would advise against the board dictating a schedule because we don't know yet, what that be. I would say you heard from Jared, a half day is not possible because we don't have transportation.
Dan, I would like you to take this, you and Chris and Mitch, I would like you to take this back and look at it and also get some feedback from the teachers and see if it's possible to bring us another proposal. Whether it's a change in the 4 days a week, but I'd like to see something else come back to us so that we can get a chance to, like Susan Manning said, get our students back. So I don't know what that would involve, if it's a matter of keeping the hybrid model, but making the days maybe a little bit longer, or making some changes to the current model that you have. But I would like to see another proposal come back to us as a board if that's possible with the same time frame.
Can we do it within this week?
I will say that is not possible. There's our schedule. Well, depends on what it is that you're looking for, but I don't know. I guess I'd want more clarity on.
But Susan Manning, did you have any other ideas of possible?
Well, I'm looking for going back 4 days a week and a schedule that seems reasonable for the students and the teachers.
Okay. Can I, for the board members, can I have you guys email Dan, Mitch, and Chris by midnight tonight with what you want to see? And I will meet with Dan, Chris, and Mitch, and we can go over it.
Dan, is there any way to add extra busing by contracting with additional company?
Interesting idea.
I don't know. I would defer to Jared to answer that.
I mean, obviously we can continue to have those conversations and see if there's other companies. I mean, most companies are contracted with another school district, and the other larger bus company that's in the area that has served us before is Badger Bus, and Verona's coming back for the most part more than half days for their 6/12, and so they are going to, and then obviously Madison is still working through their plan. So but obviously we can continue having conversation with Nelson's and see if we can hire additional bus drivers and stuff like that. But it's between equipment and bus drivers is where our challenge comes.
The one thing we didn't talk about tonight was the idea of the middle school going back and not the high school. Since the middle school schedule works with the elementary bus schedule, it's the high school that doesn't, and it ends up in the middle. I mean, the good part about that high school schedule was that it starts later, which is better for high school kids, and ends more like a time when their activities would be starting. It was more how the teaching and learning was going to happen. There still seemed to be a lot of concerns for me anyway. So I don't know if that's something we should have entertained.
Well, again, let's for all the board members. Let's, whatever the concerns you got, let's get it all in the email and send it to Dan, Mitch, and Chris together. And let's see if we can get it in by midnight. And then we can see if we need to call up a special meeting or whatever and see if we can iron some of the details out if we want to try to do this again.
So Andrew, we're not scheduled to meet until the 14th of April. I think we need a clear directive that we're going to meet the week of the 5th to the 9th to make this final decision.
Or next week.
Oh, yeah, except isn't that spring break for these guys?
Next week is spring break, yeah.
So
Elizabeth?
I agree.
So, I mean, I think I'm a little bit, what feelings am I having right now? I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm a little bit confused, and I'm a lot concerned, right? So we voted, right? We heard from Chris and Mitch around like kind of sort of now is the time, don't delay it because then it, impacts the planning. And I do think that we're at a point of diminishing returns, right? When you talk about 7 weeks or 5 weeks. And so now if we're not going to have a vote until the 5th, I don't know how, and Dan, I don't know, maybe you can elucidate this. I don't know how we get 4-day in-person instruction beginning on April 19th if we don't even vote until the week of the 5th. Like that just doesn't even seem probable within the time frame, the accelerated time frame that you've presented here today. So I guess how I feel about it, and this is after I voted yes on our reopening plan, right? Is that like, I feel like as a board, we've voted and we've committed. And to me, the remainder of the year is what it is, because otherwise, how are we going to have adequate time to do planning and preparation so that, Mitch and Chris and the staff and the families can feel comfortable and we're getting kids in a reasonable amount of time? I mean, unless I'm missing something about dates, Dan.
No, if you make a decision 2 weeks from now, that moves everything back 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Susan Manning?
Well, I think it's very clear that they have a plan and they've already put a plan together, but we have major concerns about pieces of the plan we're asking to be modified. So again, there's already a pathway here. We didn't put up a roadblock. We said, we want you to go back and do what you're doing better. That's what continuous improvement is all about.
I hear what you're saying, Susan, but I would say that traditionally, as traditional as you can be in the scope of this year, the sequence of events has been board approval leads to district action, right? Leads to what it is. And so this would be, if what we're saying is continue on with your planning without board approval, that would be different than how we've done any other phase of reopening prior to today. Unless I'm, again, board members keep me honest here, Dan, unless I'm missing something. But my understanding is kind of our process has been board says yes, the next day a survey goes out to families and that precipitates all the planning. So that would just be a change in how we've operated this entire year. And if that's where we want to go, I think then we can have that discussion, but it is different than how we've operated all year around reopening phasing.
Well, that wasn't my impression. Dan has been talking to us this entire year about working on these plans on a continuing basis. I mean, now it sounds like you're just going to throw all those plans and all the work they've done up in the air and say, we're done for this year. And I don't, as a board member, I do not feel that way at all. I'm saying, step up and bring us something that works better for our teachers and our students. That's our job, is governance.
Lorraine and then Eric.
I think I would agree with Elizabeth. I think there's so much anxiety around this whole issue as it is, and I think we owe it to students, families, and teachers to commit to a decision today. So what we voted, and I think we should commit to what we said.
Eric?
Well, I'd like to use Robert's rule and use the purpose part of that and maybe reconsider the motion. We can do that if I have someone that will second that, and then we can go back and reconsider that motion. So I'm wondering if somebody would second. I'll make a motion under purpose to reconsider the vote on a motion on the previous motion.
I believe that somebody, that motion, correct me if I'm wrong, needs to be by.
Oh,
by
you're
somebody who
right.
Was on the winning side.
You're right.
Right.
You're right.
Someone who voted no.
So someone that voted no could make that purpose motion, but I can't because I voted yes.
That's right. The point is, if somebody would like to reconsider their vote in a way that changes the outcome, they can make such a motion.
And to clarify, Dan, the vote is on the reopening timeline, correct?
Correct.
So there would still be opportunity for us to discuss scheduling potentially. I mean, not that we would dictate scheduling, but if there's concerns around scheduling, we would have the opportunity to know that.
Correct.
It seems to me that I mean I'm not seeing a lot of wiggle room for scheduling because we seem to be blocked in by busing, as irritating as that is. And I think that I think our staff has already come up with the best plan they can come up with. I think that's what they're saying. I think nobody thinks it's perfect. But I think if we're trying to mitigate the fact that we all feel bad by putting it back on the staff again, which is what I hear, I don't think that's right. And I think that's, and I, you know, I have gone so back and forth on this on the whole week. I mean, when we visited those classrooms last week, I was really feeling like, I mean, because I've been reading too nationally, I was really feeling like we have to get kids back. And then it was thinking of the reality of how do teachers deal yet again with another major, what is a more major change for them. And because they had thought through all kinds of things like kids who need to have tests or quizzes read to them, how are they going to do that? And they were going to use some of those afternoon hours for that. We haven't even been in this model long enough to know how those afternoon times are going to work yet at the high school. So we haven't even given time for this to work out. And that's what's so difficult about it being so rushed, where I came around to the idea that this just felt so disruptive that for so relatively little time gained, that I wasn't necessarily seeing the advantages that I see. I am still torn as I say that, because I too was really all about getting kids back in until I started thinking about all these, yeah, but there's this, yeah, but there's that, and all these other issues entered in. When you think of the reality of it, what it looks like for our teachers, it's very different. You know, I think the low community spread we have here, I mean, we can't govern kids' behavior. I've heard that raised too. And some of our kids are better than others. They've all been seemingly good about wearing masks in school, and that's easy enough to enforce. We can't enforce behavior outside of school. The concerns I've been hearing have been more about the efficacy of the teaching and learning, honestly, than the safety at this point. I mean, there's some concerns still about safety, but I think people are feeling better about that because we're seeing that there's not a lot of spread in schools. We're seeing we can do even if they're realistically, honestly, they aren't going to be 3 feet apart a lot. I think we have to be pretty upfront with that. But I don't know, if somebody wants to reconsider, I'd be willing to make that motion, being in the majority, that, well, just the motion would simply be to reconsider the motion, right? I mean,
Correct. And then
I'm not saying I'm supporting or not supporting, I'm just,
give a reason why you're reconsidering.
I would move to reconsider the motion on approval of I don't have my word docs here. To reconsider a motion on approval of the reopening plan for phase 5 as previously presented, due to lingering feelings of this being the last opportunity to make a decision on the part of some board members, and a possible desire for some. I don't want to, that doesn't have to be part of the motion. I'll explain that later. So I'm simply moving to reconsider the vote to not approve phase 5 of the 2020-21 reopening plan as presented.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Does the second have to be in the, or no?
No.
It doesn't, okay.
Okay.
Second doesn't have to be on the same side. Okay.
No,
Like a
in,
Robert's Rules mulligan. That
Okay.
just happened there.
No.
Yeah. All
in
right.
small boards, we don't technically need a second, so
Okay.
No, I thought we do need a second.
not in small boards.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
better to have one.
So
Do we
Yes.
need Susan Manning?
so let me just clarify. If we want to get these kids back in school, this is the only choice we have. Is that correct? Dan?
I agree with what Elizabeth stated earlier, that we need a timeline. We will, if you approve to move to a 4-day on a date, we will be ready to go on that date. But we do need we'll follow whatever the decision is of the board.
What we want is the timeline. I bet if we voted right this minute on going back to school on those dates, you'd have a unanimous vote. What we're seriously concerned about is your teaching
Susan,
plan.
they gave us the dates that they want to return. It's out there.
That's
Then
right.
you have to give them the time. If we approve it, they have to get everything scheduled, and that they got to get the survey out. They got to get everything out. Everything's going to be like this. So we have to make the decision right now.
Well, again, the
I
problem
think we
is,
have all the information we're going to get, basically. So that it was just a courtesy to some board members who I felt were uncomfortable. I think we have all the information we're going to get. I think what I'm hearing is that this basically is the plan. There's not a set plan at the middle school yet. Some of that's dependent on this decision. So because they have shared staff. So our whole district is very much more complicated than a lot of these other districts. And I don't know how many people realize that either. Some of that's becoming apparent tonight.
Yeah.
But it just is.
Okay. Any more further discussion? All right, hearing none.
Actually, Angie, just 1 second here.
Yeah.
And as it relates back to transportation, obviously these are, assumptions that we're making of taking the 2 cohorts and combining those and those kids and trying to keep at least some social distancing happening. I mean, if at the end of the day, the board's making the decision if they're going to come back on the 19th and the 26th, and obviously there's some concerns from the high school about, and even the middle school, about the length of the day for students. If that means that we have to continue having conversations with transportation, we will. We just can't guarantee that, as long as everybody understands that if we want to change the schedule and we have more kids that sign up than having proper social distancing, that there might be a lot of kids on a bus. And if we're fine with that, then obviously does the safety override some of those concerns about the length of the day? And we can continue having those conversations. And as we put this information out, maybe some families will choose not to ride the bus. When we brought back our 4K5 kids, we've put out there that we have walk zones and that we encourage people that live in the walk zone not to ride the bus. However, there are a large number of families that still want to ride the bus when they live in the walk zone. And that was just a change that we made this year for COVID to keep capacity down. So we can only look at, and I know our principals are dealing with this on a daily basis of like, why can't I ride the bus? I live in the walk zone. Why can't I, it's just maybe a little too far. And we as a school district have set this up for our own selves. We have been very, very user-friendly, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but when we have walk zones that really for Glacial Drumlin for middle school 6 through 8 kids or 5 through 8 kids that follow Cottage Grove and they're not walking more than 2 miles. Like, I know that might seem a long way, but we also have created that philosophy that anybody can ride the bus. And during this pandemic, when we need the capacity to be lower, we're not seeing that. We are still getting a lot of families to ride our bus. And if we had more elementary kids that did not ride the bus, that might free up additional busing in Cottage Grove. That could, not expecting our Cottage Grove families to not ride the bus when the high school is located in Monona, and vice versa when our middle school is located in Cottage Grove. That's just part of the uniqueness of our school district. And as we phased in, we made a decision to start our elementary school at 8:30. Those are things that, as a school district, as a Board of Education, as administration, we made decisions as we entered into virtual learning that did have an effect on all of us as of today. We chose that we didn't want to survey at the beginning of the school year to find out, because we weren't for sure what that was going to look like. So all those things have impact on the decisions that have to be made by the school district today. And go back to, Susan Manning, it wasn't Nelson's that made the decision to use the wrong fuel. It was a vendor that was a resident of Cottage Grove that delivered the wrong fuel. So we also have to make sure that we're not pushing blame on other partners or on administration or on teachers or support staff. We're all in this really together, and it's a big decision that has to be made. And like Dan said, tonight is the decision if we're coming back on the 19th or the 26th. And if that means that we have to go back and try to figure out different schedules, we will do that.
Okay. Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you very much.
So doing the vote, Susan Fox,
Can someone restate what we're voting on?
Actually, I didn't. I just voted to reconsider the motion. So we have to pass that first, and then somebody has to remake a motion, correct?
I think that's correct.
Correct.
So all we're voting on is whether we still want to vote again. So I'll vote yes.
Susan Manning,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Did I miss somebody?
You got us all. Motion reconsidered.
Motions reconsidered. All right. So now have a motion to
Just
go
need
for
to
the
vote.
previous. Yeah, we just take the vote. All right.
Yep, the previous motion that I
Previous
made
one.
was approving phase 5 of the updated 2020-2021 reopening plan as presented. That was the
Okay.
previous motion I made.
All righty. Susan Fox,
No.
Susan Manning,
Susan.
I know.
Oh, sorry.
I have no idea. Ask somebody else first. Go
all
alphabetically.
right. I can't, I'm going by what is it? Okay, Peter,
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Lorraine,
No.
Eric,
Aye.
Susan Manning,
Aye. Aye.
and me, Andrew, nay. Ayes have it. Motion carries. All right. So from there, I'd like to have a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All right. All in favor? Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Dan, Chris, and Mitch, could you hang on after we get done here